Well, hello, hello, hello.
And welcome to the Hildebrand Law Firm topic for today.
I'm Kirsten Hildebrand.
And I'm Matt Kaplan.
And today we get into a sticky wicket.
Ooh.
Yes, today is the day that we are going to talk about the blended family associated with estate planning. And one of, I think, the most important principles that needs to be understood at the outset is that doing nothing when you have a blended family is going to be an issue. Am I right, Matt?
Oh, it's the biggest issue. Doing absolutely nothing is the worst thing you can do. You're better off making a bad decision and at least having that written down than doing nothing. Because if there's one thing that we've noticed with blended families over the times that we've been doing this, it's that maybe the adults have a good idea of what's going on, but once the adults are no longer around or one of them is gone, then here comes the kids.
Yes, exactly. And blended families are such an interesting group because everyone is so incredibly unique. I would say that I have never had an estate plan come out the same between one and another.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Every single one. It's so fact intensive. That's why we always spend a considerable amount of time. Tell me about your family. What do your kids do? How do they get along? Where do they live? Do they have kids? How big is your family? Is everyone together? Something like that. There's so many factors that go into it because when we ask these questions, we're trying to think about what is going to happen down the road.
And what is going to be the right approach to this, reflecting what the needs and desires and goals are of our blended family couple that is in front of us. And so, yeah, it's really fascinating. What I will say is it can be a little bit stressful to think about coming in and doing estate planning no matter what. But when you have a blended family, then the stress level, we just need to acknowledge, maybe a little bit higher because there's so many different elements that are going into that. And our goal here is to really make it as stress free as possible. And so we really come at these things with no judgment or preconceived ideas about what is the right thing to do, but really in this situation, what does this couple believe is the appropriate approach to the estate plan?
Right. And just recently, even within the last 2 months, I've had situations of uh, guy brings a child into the marriage, then he has a child with his new spouse. Both of them bring kids into the marriage, young kids. I've had situations where they all bring grown kids into the marriage. I had a situation where there was a couple who decided to get married in their 70s. They just got married a few years ago in their 70s. They have 4 kids in their 40s and they have grandkids and they might even have a great grandkid too. So they have this giant family blended family situation, none together. And what makes matters even more difficult and more confusing too is especially in a situation where one spouse brings in the vast majority of the money.
Exactly. But they want to take care of the other spouse while they're alive. But then there's all kinds of different thoughts about what happens to the money after that. And how much do you protect the spouse? And then when do you want to make sure that you're sheltering assets for your blood children that you've brought into the marriage? So these are all really complicated patterns, and I love it
Me too.
because I think it's always so fascinating to see what different opinions are and where people land with all of these different fact scenarios. But one thing for sure, you don't want to land in a place where the documents are written poorly. So a situation comes to mind. Husband and wife got married, adult children. So adult children blending can be a little bit more of a challenge because they already have their own lives. They haven't had to share the sink in the bathroom or sit down and eat breakfast together. So there's a little bit more distance there, and they can all get along around the Thanksgiving table once a year. But then once mom and dad pass away, that's when the fangs come out and the nails as well. And that was exactly the situation. Mom and dad got married. They had a trust put into place. The trust was a 7-page trust, and it was probably written by the secretary of the attorney who put this in place. And the secretary literally transcribed what the attorney wanted incorrectly into the document. And so they had two groups of children. Children A were his children, children B were her children. And the idea was to divide up the estate so his children would get a certain amount and her children would get a certain amount. The problem was in the language that was drafted, the attorney's note said one thing about what the division should be, and the document said something else that was not clear. $40,000 in litigation later, we get an answer from the judge. And I can tell you, Group A children were unhappy, Group B children were very happy. And yet, at the same time, is anybody really a winner in that situation? Now they've gone through a year and a half of anxiety, fighting, and not really having the use and enjoyment of the funds. So, in that instance, the lawyer always wins because then the kids are the ones that end up with less. So, that is a perfect example of how treating a blended family through an estate plan is certainly a good step one. But step two is it has to be well written and it has to reflect what the people really want, and it needs to be in writing. Otherwise, it's never going to happen.
Right, and the big thing is too, and that's a wonderful story. And the big thing though with blended families, and everyone is different, every situation is different, but the commonality that I always recognize is that they at least have an idea. The couple at least has an idea. Here's what I want to go to my kids. Here's what we want to go to your kids. Here's what we want to go to our kids. They really, most of the time, it's incredibly fair from what I've noticed. And if it isn't, they're on the same page. You know, they
Yeah.
say, oh, hey, they've got their own money. But another interesting thing to consider, especially with a blended family, is that, you know, you have kids, so you can attest to this. Um, what do your kids have to do in order for you to disinherit them? It's got to be unbelievably egregious,
Oh my
right?
word.
So,
Yes, it would have to be horrendous.
but what's interesting in a blended family situation, I don't like them. They're out.
Yes, that is very true.
We people have told us that it's so much easier, and I even have people that reach out to me once a year to get their trust updated because they're like, well, this person, I like them this year. We'll see what happens next year. And so because of the volatility with that, with
Yes.
them not being your blood family, it's a lot easier to just kind of write them off. And so that's why having something concrete, something in writing that reflects not only your opinion of someone now,
Mm.
but your overarching opinion of the family in general, and especially a conversation that you've had with your spouse saying, you know, no matter what happens, here's what's most fair, here's what we both want. Having something like that in place and having something that's well written in place can help alleviate the concerns like that.
And then that gets secured so that then there's a real, so then it is locked in and it is not something that can be changed. Because you're right, spouse A passes away, spouse B gets mad at spouse A's kids or really never liked them to begin with, and so then spouse B goes to the lawyer and says, I'm ready to rewrite this entire estate plan. And is there anything that prevents that from happening under normal circumstances? If you have a will and or a revocable trust, there is nothing that prevents that from happening unless there's very specific language in there that says that the trust becomes irrevocable upon the passing of the first spouse. So, and even then, you have to be absolutely certain about the wording, and you have to make sure that that trust is actually funded, because you have to have certain assets going into that irrevocable trust in order for that protection there to be for the kids. So that's something else I've run into too, where the structure might be okay, but then the funding of the trust is incorrect. And so then the children of spouse B who passed away first end up not having anything in their bag of goods because it never was funded to begin with.
Right, and one of the big issues that we see that people don't really admit to us, but that we notice is people get married. One person brings in a considerable more amount of money than the other person. Other person has kids. This person has kids. Let's treat the kids equally, says this person. This person, and I've had them say this in front of me, I don't think your kids deserve a fair share like my kids do. I made the money. And so we've seen that a lot. What happens if this person passes away without any planning in place? Everything goes to this person. Is this person obligated to give money to this person's kids? Not if
No.
they don't have anything in place. Then all of a sudden the rich person's money goes to the less rich spouse. Less rich spouse can decide what to do with it. And so when you have an uneven marriage like that from the purposes of money standpoint, and you both have kids that you brought into it, or you have a kid together, that makes it even more complicated.
Yes. So, bottom line, if you have a blended family, estate planning is for you because you will feel so much relief once you get it done. So, it might not be the easiest thing to talk about, it might not be the easiest process to go through. I know that I personally have had to help people work through some difficult moments here in this conference room, but we do work through them and we do come up with a solution. And once that solution is in place, the conversation is behind you, the documents are signed, and it's behind you. And now you can move on in peace. And so I think that is what I would encourage anyone out there who has a blended family, do create that plan now so that it is in place so that the peace continues after you pass away.
And also for your kids know where they stand.
Yes.
There's no guessing if anything happens to your parent versus the other parent. There's no guessing. You know exactly where you stand. You know exactly the relationship you have with the whole family.
That's exactly right. And so, again, that's why we love protecting your today and your tomorrow. And thank you so much for joining us for this discussion about blended families. And we will look forward to seeing you next time.